Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Western Canon Challenge, where we are reading the entirety of the Western literary canon out loud. Today, we continue our journey reading Emerson's journals. We are up to journal collection number 29, which dates from the year 1838, when the author was 34 and then would turn 35 years old in May. It does begin with a untranslated quotation from Martial in Latin. And per my rule, if it is untranslated and the editor who claims to have an annotated, and it is annotated, but not as thoroughly as I had hoped when I first started. But in some places they do translate, and in some places they don't. And in this case, they don't. And per my rule, I will not try to hunt down every single Greek, Latin uh, quotation that's untranslated because it would just take forever to get through 10 volumes of these journals doing that. So we are basically sacrificing depth for breadth. And with that said, it does start with a quick update on what's going on in Emerson's life by the editor, and I'll read that, and then I will continue straight to the journals. The Boston course of lectures on human culture was successful. Meantime, the quiet home life went on, brightened by the charm of the little Waldo. Friends came and went, as did philosophers and unbidden reformers. Besides his daily record of thought, Mr. Emerson had to prepare a lecture on peace for the American Peace Society, and invitations for the discourse during the summer from the senior class in the Cambridge Divinity College and the literary societies of Dartmouth College. January 26th, 1838. All this mild winter, Hygeia and the Muse befriend with the elements the poor, driven scribe. 8 lectures have been read on 8 fine evenings, and today the mercury stands at 52 degrees at 3 o'clock p.m. in the shade. Today I send the oration to press again. Sleep and dreams. The landscape and scenery of dreams seem not to fit us, but like a cloak or coat of some other person to overlap and encumber the wearer. So is the ground, the road, the house, in dreams too long or too short, and if it served no other purpose, would at least show us how accurately nature fits man awake. January 27th. How much superstition in the learned and unlearned! All take for granted that a great deal, nay, almost all, is known and forever settled. That which a man now says he merely throws in as a confirmatory of this corpse, or corporation universal, of science, whilst the fact is that nothing is known, and every new mind ought to take the attitude of Columbus, launch out from the ignorant, gaping world, and sail west for a new world. Very, very few thoughts in an age. Now Wordsworth has thought, and more truly Goethe has thought. Both have perceived the extreme poverty of literature, but all the rest of the learned were men of talents merely, who had some feat which each could do with words, Moore, Campbell, Scott, Mackintosh, Niebuhr, and the rest. I think, too, that if there were philosophers, orators, men to think boldly, there would be no difficulty in carrying with you the mind of any mixed audience. As soon as you became yourself dilated with a thought, you carry men with you as by miraculous uplifting. You lose them by your own want of thought, of which impotence they become instantly aware. February 3rd. 5 days ago came Carlyle's letter, and has kept me warm ever since with its affection and praise. It seems his friend John Sterling loves Waldo Emerson also, by reason of reading the book Nature. I am quite bewitched, maugre all my unamiableness, with so dainty a relation as a friendship for a scholar and poet I have never seen, and he Carlyle's friend. I read his papers immediately in the Blackwood, and see a thinker, if not a poet. Thought he has, and right in every line, but music he cares not for. I had certainly supposed that a lover of Carlyle and of me must needs love rhythm and music of style. So pleasant a piece of sentiment as this new relation, It does not seem very probable that any harsh experience will be allowed to disturb. It is not very probable that we shall meet bodily to put the ethereal web we weave to the test of any rending or straining. And yet God knows I dare and I will boldly impugn his temper that he dares meet and cooperate until we are assayed and proven. I am not a sickly sentimentalist, though the name of a friend warms my heart and makes me feel as a girl, but must and will have in my companion sense and virtue. February 5th. But the lecture must be writ, friend or no friend, and it seems as if condition might be treated, fate, fortune, love, demonology, sleep, death, what deities or demons environ man, nothing but aids him. Then the fact that we lie open to God, and what may he not do? But no, we can predict very well that though new thoughts may come and cheer and gild, they shall not transport us. There are limits to our mutability. Time seems to make these shadows that we are, tough and peaked. Yet remember that the hunger of people for truth is immense. The reason why they yawn is because you have it not. Consider, too, how Shakespeare and Milton are formed. They are just such men as we all are to their contemporaries, and none suspected their superiority. But after all were dead, and a generation or two besides, it is discovered that they surpass all. Each of us then take the same moral to himself. True greatness will preach its own contentment. It will not sneer, it will not scold, it will smile at the pomp-encumbered king. It will pity those who harness themselves with cares, but will persist itself in wearing a simpler and lighter costume. It will reckon all its own. There are merits we cannot estimate. The military and the arithmetical and the intellectual we can, but scarce any others. Observe our defective names for character. But piety transcends, and there may be many elements of character that we want skill now to detect, as we cannot find any virus in the air of a plague hospital. But the air of Alps and the air of the dead room give the same result. We walk with angels unawares. Fame is not the result we seek. Fame to my man shall be as the tinkle of a passing sleigh bell, but he shall have the past and the present. He shall foresee himself in scanning the genius of divine providence. February 9th. In Boston, Wednesday night, I read at the Masonic Temple the 10th and last lecture of my course on human culture. Lecture 1, Introductory; 2, the hands; 3, the head; 4, the eye and the ear; 5, the heart; 6, the heart, continued; 7, prudence; 8, heroism; 9, holiness; 10, general views. The pecuniary advantage of the course has been considerable. Season tickets sold 319 for $620. Single tickets sold for 373 for $186. A total of $806. Deduct error somewhere of $13. 793 total. However, deduct expenses $225, and you arrive at a net profit of $568. The attendance on this course, adding to the above list 85 tickets distributed by me to friends, will be about 439 persons on the average of an evening, and as it was much larger at the close than at the beginning, I think 500 persons at the closing lectures. A very gratifying interest on the part of the audience was evinced in the views offered, which were drawn chiefly out of the materials already collected in this journal. The 10 lectures were read on 10 pleasant winter evenings on consecutive Wednesdays, thanks to the teacher of me and of all, the upholder, the health giver, thanks and lowliest wondering acknowledgment. Opinion is our secondary or outward conscience, very unworthy to be compared with the primary, but when that is seared, this becomes of great importance. A man whose legs are sound may play with his cane or throw it away, but if his legs are gouty, he must lean on his cane. You must love me as I am. Do not tell me how much I should love you. I am content. I find my satisfactions in a calm, considerate reverence, measured by the virtues which provoke it. So love me as I am. When I am virtuous, love me. When I am vicious, hate me. When I am lukewarm, neither good nor bad, care not for me. But do not by your sorrow or your affection solicit me to be somewhat else than I by nature am. February 11th. At the "teachers' meeting" last night, my good Edmund, after disclaiming any wish to difference Jesus from a human mind, suddenly seemed to alter his tone, and said that Jesus made the world and was the eternal God. Henry Thoreau merely remarked that, Mr. Hosmer had kicked the pail over. I delight much in my young friend Thoreau, who seems to have as free and direct a mind as any I have ever met. He told, as we walked this afternoon, a good story about a boy who went to school with him, Wentworth, who resisted the school's mistress's command that the children should bow to Dr. Heywood and other gentlemen as they went by, and when Dr. Heywood stood waiting and cleared his throat with a hem, Wentworth said, "You needn't hem, doctor, I shan't bow." February 16th. And what can you say for Milton, the king of song in the last ages? Milton the heroic, the continuator of the series of the bards, the representative of the immortal band with fillet and harp, and soul all melody. To me he is associated with my family, with my two glorious dead, Edward and Charles, whose ear tingled with his melodies, with Charles especially, who, I think, knew the delight of that man's genius as well or better than anyone who ever loved it. It was worth Milton's labor on his poems to give so much clear joy and manly satisfaction to a noble soul in this distant time. Of this I am very sure, that Milton himself would more prize the admiration, nay, that is almost too strong a word, I may dare to say rather the even love of Charles than of any other person who has written about him. For Charles's severe, delicate, discriminating taste read in Milton what seemed, I doubt not, rather his own writing than another man's. Charles could not write as he could read, and Milton wrote for Charles. My own ear still rings with the diamond sharpness of his poetic recitations of Samson Agonistes. Can this be he, that heroic, that renowned, irresistible Samson, whom, unarmed, no strength of man or fiercest wild beast could withstand, who tore the lion as the lion tears the kid, ran on embattled armies clad in iron, and weaponless himself, and the, tame Meladic fowl, and, held up their pearled wrists and took him in, And so does Milton seem to me a poet who had a majestic ear, and an ear for all the delicacies of rhythm, not at all squeamish. February 17th. My good Henry Thoreau made this else solitary afternoon sunny with his simplicity and clear perception. How comic is simplicity in this double-dealing, quacking world! Everything that boy says makes merry with society, though nothing can be graver than his meaning. I told him he should write out the history of his college life as Carlyle has his tutoring. We agreed that the seeing the stars through a telescope would be worth all the astronomical lectures. Then he described Mr. Quimby's electrical lecture here, and the experiment of the shock, and added that, college corporations are very blind to the fact that the twinge in the elbow is worth all the lecturing. Tonight I walked under the stars through the snow, and stopped and looked at my far sparklers, and heard the voice of the wind so slight and pure and deep as if it were the sound of the stars themselves revolving. How much self-reliance it implies to write a true description of anything, for example, Wordsworth's picture of skating, that leaning back on your heels and stopping in mid-career. So simple a fact no common man would have trusted himself to detach as a thought. February 19th. Solitude is fearsome and heavy-hearted. I have never known a man who had such good accumulated upon him as I have. Reason, health, wife, child, friends, competence, reputation, the power to inspire, and the power to please. Yet leave me alone a few days, and I creep about as if in expectation of a calamity. My mother, my brother, are at New York. A little farther across the sea is my friend Thomas Carlyle. In the islands I have another friend, it seems. I will love you all and be happy in your love. My gentle wife has an angel's heart, and for my boy his grief is more beautiful than other people's joy. Carlyle, too, ah, my friend, I thought as I looked at your book today, which all the brilliant so admire, that you have spoiled it for me. Why, I say, should I read this book? The man himself is mine. He can sit under trees of paradise and tell me 100 histories deeper, truer, dearer than this, all the eternal days of God. I shall not tire, I shall not shame him. We shall be children in heart and men in counsel and in act. The pages which to others look so rich and alluring, to me have a frigid and marrowless air, for the warm hand and heart I have an estate in, and the living eye of which I can almost discern across the sea some sparkles. I think my affection to that man really incapacitates me from reading his book. In the windy night and the sordid day, out of banks and bargains and disagreeable business, I espy you, and run to my pleasant thoughts. February 23rd. Abel Adams told me that Boyden, the late landlord of the Tremont House, told him that he made $45,000 in 1 year in that establishment and was frightened at his success. Another year he made nearly so much, but it nearly killed him with care and confinement. He kept it 8 years. March 4th. I told Alcott in the city, Cousin and Geoffrey, and the opinion of this and that doctor showed very large. A fame of the bookstore seemed commanding, but as soon as we got 10 miles out of town, in the bushes, we whistled at such matters, cared little for societies, systems, or bookstores. God and the world return again to mind, sole problem, and we value an observation upon a brass knob, a genuine observation on a button more than whole encyclopedias. It is even so as I read this new book of Ripley's. It looks to me, neat, elegant, accurate as it is, a mere superficiality. In my Jack Cade way of counting by number and weight, counting the things, I find nothing worse than the accomplished cousin and the mild Geoffrey, the most unexceptionable clearness, precision, and good sense. Never a slip, never an ignorance, but unluckily never an inspiration. One page of Milton's poorest tract is worth the whole. Last night a remembering talk with Lydian. I went back to the first smile of Ellen on the doorstone at Concord. I went back to all that delicious relation to feel, as ever how many shades, how much reproach. Strange as it is that I can go back to no part of youth, no past relation, without shrinking and shrinking. Not Ellen, not Edward, not Charles. Infinite compunctions embitter each of those dear names, and all who surround them. Ah, could I have felt in the presence of the first as now I feel, my own power and hope, and so have offered her in every word and look the heart of a man humble and wise, but resolved to be true and perfect with God, and not, as I fear it, seemed the uneasy, uncentered joy of one who received in her a good, a lovely good, out of all proportion to his deserts, I might happily have made her days longer and certainly sweeter, and at least have recalled her seraph smile without a pang. I console myself with the thought that if Ellen, if Edward, if Charles could have read my entire heart, they should have seen nothing but rectitude of purpose and generosity conquering the superficial coldness and prudence. But I ask now, why was not I made like all these beatified mates of mine, superficially generous and noble as well as internally so? They never needed to shrink at any remembrance, and I at so many sad passages that took me to now as if I had been blind and mad. Well, O God, I will try and learn from this sad memory to be brave and circumspect and true henceforth, and weave now a web that will not shrink. This is the thorn in the flesh. At church I saw that beautiful child A.P., and my fine, natural, manly neighbor, who bore the bread and wine to the communicants with so clear an eye and excellent face and manners. That was all I saw that looked like God at church. Let the clergy beware when the well-disposed scholar begins to say, I cannot go to church, time is too precious. Bad to see a row of children looking old. March 5th. Yesterday, Sunday, was a beautiful day, mild, calm, and though the earth is covered with snow, somewheres 2 feet deep, yet the day and the night, moonlit, were as good for thought, if the man were rested and peaceful, as any in the year. The meteorology of thought I like to note. They say of Alcott, and I have sometimes assented, that he is one-toned, and hearkens with no interest to books or conversation out of the scope of his one commanding idea. Maybe so, but very different is his centralism from that of vulgar monomaniacs, for he looks with wise love at all real facts, at street faces, at the broad-shouldered, long-haired farmer, at the domestic woman, at the kitchen, at the furniture, at the season as related to man, and so on. He can hear the voice which said to George Fox, quote, "That which others trample on must be thy food." End quote. What shall I answer to these friendly youths who ask me an account of theism, and think the views I have expressed of the impersonality of God desolating and ghastly? I say that I cannot find, when I explore my own consciousness, any truth in saying that God is a person, but the reverse. I feel that there is some profanation in saying he is personal. To represent him as an individual is to shut him out of my consciousness. He is then but a great man, such as the crowd worships. Yet, cor purgat oratorio. Of the French eclecticism, and what cousin thinks so conclusive, see George Ripley's Specimens, etc., Volume 1, page 45, I would say there is an optical illusion in it. Take Cousin's philosophy, a kissed finger cannot write. Well, this book, if the pretension they make be good, ought to be wisdom's wisdom, and we can hug the volume to our heart and make a bonfire of all the libraries. But here are people who have read it and still survive, nor is it at once perceptible in their future reasonings that they have talked with God face to face. Indeed, I have read it myself, as I have read any other book. I found in it a few memorable thoughts, for philosophy does not absolutely hinder people from having thought, but by no means so many memorable thoughts as I could have got out of many another book. Say, for example, Montaigne's Essays. A profound thought anywhere classifies all things. A profound thought will lift Olympus. I have read with astonishment and unabated curiosity and pleasure Carlyle's Revolution again, half through the second volume. I cannot help feeling that he squanders his genius. Why should an imagination such as never rejoiced before the face of God since Shakespeare be content to play? Why should he trifle and joke? I cannot see, I cannot praise. It seems to me he should have writ in such deep earnest that he should have trembled to his fingers' ends with the terror and the beauty of his visions. It is not true that with all his majestic toleration, his infinite superiority as a man to the flocks of clean and unclean creatures he describes, that yet he takes a point of view somewhat higher than his insight or any human insight can profitably use and maintain, that there is therefore some inequality between his power of painting, which is matchless, and his power of explaining, which satisfies not. Somewhere you must let out all the length of all the reins. There is somewhat real, there is God. I regret one thing omitted in my late course of lectures, that I did not state with distinctness and conspicuously the great error of modern society in respect to religion, and say, You can never come to any peace or power until you put your whole reliance in the moral constitution of man, and not at all in a historical Christianity. The belief in Christianity that now prevails is the unbelief of men. They will have Christ for a Lord and not for a brother. Christ preaches the greatness of man, but we hear only the greatness of Christ. March 6th. Read in Montaigne's chapter on Seneca and Plutarch a very good critique on the systems and methods on which I expended my petulance in these pages yesterday. Montaigne is spiced throughout with rebellion as much as Alcott or my young Henry Thoreau. It is a mystery of numbers that in loss and gain, whether of finances or of political majorities, the transfer of one counts not one but two. Well, in magnanimities it is not otherwise. I have generous purposes and go on benefiting somebody, well pleased with myself. Presently I listen to the prudences and say, "This person is heedless and ungrateful. I withhold my hand." Instantly the new coldness awakens resentment in the other party and all the feelings that naturally respond to selfishness. I, who pleased myself with my generosity, and am still the same person, find no sort of complacency toward myself and the supposed beneficiary, but only hard thoughts, and the difference of cost betwixt munificence and meanness may amount to $1.53. I like to be sure Mrs. Hoare's good saying, when that transcendent beggar, Ma'am Bliss, received the beefsteak she had sent her, saying, "Yes, you can leave it. Mrs. D. has sent me some turkey, but this will do for the cat." Mrs. H. told Elizabeth that it would do her as much good as if she thanked us. Very true and noble, Mrs. Hoare, and yet I grudged the $1.50 paid to my stupid, beggar-mannered, thankless Mrs. W., because all that I gave to this lump of tallow was so much taken from my friend and brother, whom I thought to go labor on day wages to help. March 9th. There was a simple man grew so suddenly rich that, coming one day into his own stately door and hall in a reverie, he felt on his mind the accustomed burden of fear that now he should see a great person, and was making up his mouth to ask firmly if was at home, when he bethought himself, "Who is blank? Who is it I should ask for?" And on second thought he saw it was his own house, and he was blank. We take great pleasure in meeting a cultivated peasant, and think his independence of thought and his power of language surprising. But it is soon tedious to talk with him, for there is no progress in his conversation, no speed, no prompt intelligence, but a steady ox-team portage, that you can see from where you stand where it will have got half an hour hence. The scholar is a comfort to your heart, for he leaves all the details of the way and will jump with you over a few centuries when we have got into a bog. Of droll word blunders, Lydian could never cure Mrs. W. of calling mashed smashed. Quote, "Oh, yes, she had fed baby with a smashed potato," Snowed, quote, "snoo," "You fired the scissors at me," March 11th. The advantage of riches seems to be in the skin, or not much deeper. I am quite free to go to my work, the work which is my joy to do. This makes a state of perfect preparation for the work. If I wake up in another man's house, or in a hotel, or place of constraint where I have come to do a forced work, come, not with ideal or freedom, but with external compulsion of some sort, then I feel an irritability, as much in the skin as in the soul, that pesters and hinders me. If I were master of millions, I should not feel such vexation, but should control the circumstances, and, inasmuch as I am master of hundreds or thousands, I do. And such, and no other, seems the advantage of riches. If a man have more soul, more will, less skin, he can do without riches. Quote, "Love is the sole title deed to property in the spiritual world," said C.C.E. March 14th. Read a lecture on peace at the Odeon on Monday evening 12th. Yesterday, saw Margaret Fuller and the Tremont pictures, and talked of Carlyle and Cousin, and at the soiree saw Bancroft and Ripley and Loring, and so had a pleasant Boston visit. Bancroft talked of the foolish Globe newspaper. It has a circulation of 30,000, and as he said, each copy is read by 10 persons, so that an editorial article is read by 300,000 persons, which he pronounced with all deep-mouthed elocution. I only told him then I wished they would write better if they wrote for so many. I ought to have said what utter nonsense to name in my ear this number, as if that were anything. 3,000,000 such people as can read the Globe with interest are as yet in too crude a state of nonage to deserve any regard. I ought to have expressed a sincere contempt for the scrambled newspaper. March 18th. I was so ungrateful in reading and finishing Carlyle's history yesterday as to say, but philosophers must not write history for me. They know too much. I read some Plutarch or even dull Belknap or Williamson, and in their dry, dead annals I get thought which they never put there. I hear a voice of great nature through these wooden pipes, but my wise poet sees himself all that I can see of the divine in events, and, however slightly, says that he sees it. So is my subject exhausted, and my end as an artist not furthered. For do they not say that the highest joy is the creator's, not the receiver's? Yet wiser I have been and am whenever I sit and hear, and wiser I am in this reading when my poet soars highest. It is strange how little moral sentence, how few moral sentences there are in literature. They affect us deeper, greatlier than all else. Yet how rare. The whole praise of Wordsworth is based on some 10 pages or less of such matter. Herbert's is that. Shakespeare has spoken a little, and Carlyle has uttered both before and again in this book some immortal accents. Thus, what is said of Delaunay, who could not fire the Bastille magazine, what is said of Danton, the realist, and of the moral to go and do otherwise issuing from this era, abide in my memory with vital heat. I have read the second volume of poems by Tennyson with like delight to that I found in the first, and with like criticism. Drenched he is in Shakespeare, born, baptized, and bred in Shakespeare, yet has his own humor, and original rhythm, music, and images. How ring his humorsome lines in the ear! Quote, "In the afternoon they came unto a land in which it seemed always afternoon." The old year's death pleases me most, but why I speak of him now is because he had a line or two that looked like the moral strain amaranthine I spake of. At church all day, but almost tempted to say I would go no more. Men go where they are wont to go, else had no soul gone this afternoon. Yet no fault in the good man. Evidently he thought himself a faithful, searching preacher, mentioned that he thought so several times, and seemed to be one of that large class, sincere persons based on sham, sincere persons who are bred and do live in shams. But why do I blame the preachers? What is so rare among men may be rare among preachers. All men are bound to articulate speaking as well as they. I doubt I shall never hear the august laws of morals as I am capable of them. No pronouncer of them shall fill my ear. Carlyle has too much reason for his insisting so oft on articulate speech as opposed to hysterics. There is but little. Even the few speeches he quotes from his great men in history, after the first or second sentence, do merely verb it, verbs and not thoughts. The church is a good place to study theism by comparing the things said with your consciousness. There is no better subject for effective writing than the clergy. I ought to sit and think, and then write a discourse to the American clergy, showing them the ugliness and unprofitableness of theology and churches at this day, and the glory and sweetness of the moral nature out of whose pale they are almost wholly shut. Present realism as the front face, and remind them of the fact that I shrink and wince as soon as the prayers begin, and am very glad if my tailor has given me a large velvet collar to my wrapper or cloak. The prayers are so bad. A good subject because we can see always the good ideal, the noble ethics of nature as contrast to the poverty-stricken pulpit. See how easily these old worships of Moses, of Socrates, of Zoroaster, of Jesus domesticate themselves in my mind. It will be admitted I have great susceptibility to such. Will it not be as easy to say they are other Waldos? A man comes now into the world a slave. He comes saddled with 20 or 40 centuries. Asia has arrearages, and Egypt arrearages, not to mention all the subsequent history of Europe and America. But he is not his own man, but the hapless bondman of time, with these continents and aeons of prejudice to carry on his back. It is now grown so bad that he cannot carry the mountain any longer and be a man. There must be a revolution. Let the revolution come, and let one come breathing free into the earth to walk by hope alone. If it were a new world, then perhaps the ideal would seem possible, but now it seems to me they are cheated out of themselves and live on another's sleeve. Astronomy is sedative to the human mind. In skeptical hours, when things go whirling and we doubt if all is not an extemporary dream, the calm, remote, and secular character of astronomical facts composes us to a sublime peace. March 19th. Yesterday a snowstorm, lying today as in January banks, and the bluebirds have disappeared. If the best people know, say A and B and C and L and S, should meet with highest aims, should meet for worship, I think they would say, "Come, now let us join in aspirations to the soul. How little a portion is known of him, what needs but lowly utter sincerity, and let us say together what we feel." To absolute mind, a person is but a fact, but consciousness is God. Of the New Testament, the supreme value is the charm I wrote of yesterday, which attaches to moral sentences, to the Veda, to Seneca, to all the vaticinations, and highest to the Hebrew Muse. March 21st. Last night, George Minot says he heard, in his bed, the screaming and squalling of the wild geese flying over between 9 and 10 o'clock. The newspaper notices the same thing. I, writing from Framingham, at the same hour heard nothing. The collar of my wrapper did not shut out nature. March 24th. The natural motions of the soul are so much better than the voluntary ones that you will never do yourself justice in dispute. The thought is not then taken hold of by the right handle, does not show itself proportioned and in its true bearings. It bears extorted, hoarse, and half-witness. I have been led yesterday into a rambling exculpatory talk on theism. I say that here we feel at once that we have no language, that words are only auxiliary and not adequate, are suggestions and not copies of our cogitation. I deny personality to God because it is too little, not too much. Life, personal life, is faint and cold to the energy of God. For reason and love and beauty, or that which is all these, is the life of life, the reason of reason, the love of love. In the highest moments we are a vision. March 26th. Law of conversation. Thought is only to be answered by thought, not by authority, not by wishes. I tell men what I find in my consciousness. They answer me, it is wrong, it is false, for we wish otherwise. I report to them from my thought how little we know of God, and they reply, "We think you have no Father. We love to address the Father." Yes, I say, the Father is a convenient name and image to the affections, but drop all images if you wish to come at the elements of your thought and use as mathematical words as you can. We must not be so wise. We must not affect, as all mankind do, to know all things and to have quite finished and done God and heaven. We must come back to our real, initial state, and see and own that we have yet beheld but the first ray of being. In strict speech, it seems fittest to say, I become rather than I am. I am a becoming, so do I less sever or divide the one. I am now nothing but a prophecy of that I shall be. To me, seeing enchant sun and stars and persons, they all manifest to me my far-off rights. They foreshow, or they are the first ripples and wavelets of that vast inundation of the all which is beyond and which I tend and labor to be. March 27th. This is one of the chilly white days that deform my spring. It seems as if we owed to literature certain impressions concerning nature which nature did not justify. Somewhere, as I have often said, not only every orator, but every man should let out all the length of all the reins, should find or make a frank and hearty expression of himself. If George Bradford keeps school, and in the details of his week loses himself, or fails to communicate himself to the minds of his scholars in his full stature and proportion as a wise and good man, he does not yet find his vocation. He must find in that an outlet of his character, so that he may justify himself to their minds for doing what he does. He must take some trivial exercise or lesson and make it liberal. Whatever he knows and thinks, whatever in his apprehension is worth his doing, that let him communicate, or they will never know him and honor him aright. George B. Emerson is more interested in his trees and cabinet of shells than in books. He has not then given his lessons to his school until he has shown them the shells and the shrubs. I thought, as I rode to Acton, that we all betray God to the devil, being to negation. I know well the value of a sentiment and of sincerity, yet how easily will any fop, any coat and boots draw me to an appearance of sympathy with him, and to an air of patronizing the sentiments. The commonest person of condition and fashion affects me more than is right, and I am mute, passive, and let their world wag, let them make the world, I being but a block of the same. I ought to go upright and vital and say the truth in all ways. Do not carry love to affectation and slaver. Plain it is that our culture is not come, that none are cultivated, that it could not be said by the traveler, I met in that country one high-souled and prevailing man. Foolish, whenever you take the meanness and formality of what thing you do as a lecture, a preaching, a school, a teachers' meeting, and do not rather magnify it by the unwilling spiracle of all your character and aims. Let their ears tingle, let them say, we never saw it in this manner. It seemed when I described the possible church the other day, as if very hardly could any such sincerity and singleness be retained as was needful to a worship, very hardly even by such saints and philosophers as I could name. This morbid delicacy of the religious sentiment, this thin existence fluttering on the very verge of non-existence, accuses our poverty jejune life. It will be better by and by, will it not? Will it not when habitual be more solid and admit of the action of the will without deceasing? April 1st. Cool or cold, windy, clear day. The divinity school youths wished to talk with me concerning theism. I went rather heavy-hearted, for I always find that my views chill or shock people at the first opening. But the conversation went well, and I came away cheered. I told them that the preacher should be a poet smit with love of the harmonies of moral nature, and yet look at the Unitarian Association and see if its aspect is poetic. They all smiled no. A minister nowadays is plainest prose, the prose of prose. He is a warming pan, a night chair at sick beds and rheumatic souls, and the fire of the minstrel's eye and the vivacity of his word is exchanged for intense, grumbling enunciation of the Cambridge sort and the scripture phraseology. Lydian said, as I awoke this morning, a lively verse enough of some hymn of Bunyan. There is no fanaticism as long as there is the creative muse. Genius is a character of illimitable freedom, and as long as I hear one graceful modulation of wit, I know the genial soul and do not smell faggots. The Bunyan, the Bohème, is near far to Rabelais and Montaigne than to Bloody Mary and Becket and Inquisitions. How well the newspapers illustrate the truth that only biography, not nations, interest. The reporter tells us nothing but of Calhoun, Clay, and Webster. Not the sub-treasury bill, but the personal controversy absorbs them. I thought as I read of Napoleon yesterday in O'Meara that the growths of genius, even of the nocturnal sort, like his, or will without love, are of a certain voluminous, secular, federal, cosmic, cyclic unfolding that does not advance the elect individual first over John, then Adam, then Richard, and give to each the pain of discovered inferiority, but by every pulsation he expands there where he works, passing at each pulsation classes, populations of men, as the plumule of the oak passes the proportions of the plumule of the whortleberry. He was a plebeian. When emperor, he felt that a baron, a count of the old noblesse, had certain advantages of him not felt whilst his genius was in place, and could justify its upstart growth by his prodigious energy, fashioning Italy, fashioning Spain, but visible to both when he sat discrowned in a paltry house at St. Helena. I like the man in O'Meara's picture. He is good-natured, as greatness always is, and not pompous. Ample good nature, able men are moral. Tell him, Sir H. Lowe said Bonaparte, that when a man has lost his word, he has lost everything which distinguishes him from the brute. Consider that it is a refreshment to the eyes to look at a poultry yard. I hear the hen cluck and see her stepping round with perfect complacency. But if a man goes by, I have a sorrowful feeling. But if a friend, if a man of genius, if a hero passes, then I rejoice and can no longer see hens. Why, since a babe is beautiful, should a man, almost every man, be ugly? In conversation, women run on, as it is called, a great vice. A fine woman keeps her purpose and maintains her ground with integrity of manner, whilst you censure or rally her. If she is disconcerted and grieved, the game is up and society agloom. Preaching, especially false preaching, is for able men a sickly employment. Study of books is also sickly, and the garden and the family, wife, mother, son, and brother are a balsam. There is health in table talk and nursery play. We must wear old shoes and have aunts and cousins. April 19th. I have been to New York and seen Bryant and Dewey, and at home seen young Jones Very, and two youthful philosophers who came here from Cambridge, Edward Washburn and Renouf, and who told me fine hopeful things of their mates in the senior class. And now young Eustace has been here and tells me of more aspiring and heroical young men, and I begin to conceive hopes of the Republic. Then is this disaster of Cherokees brought to me by a sad friend to blacken my days and nights. I can do nothing. Why shriek? Why strike ineffectual blows? This is the end of part 1 of Emerson's journal collection number 29. In the following video, we will take up the journal collection starting on the date April 20th. Thank you for listening.